Well, good morning. Good morning. This is the lovely podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I am your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan, and today is episode 17, and we are going to take a look at the Laborers International Union of North America, also known as, I think they have it as LIUNA, and sometimes they have it as the Laborers Union. So let's go ahead and get started and take a look at this one. Let's go over the facts first, just some key points. So first of all, they were founded April 13th, 1903. Their slogan is Feel the Power. Almost reminds me of like a Gatorade commercial. They have locations in the United States and Canada. They have 557,999 members as of 2013. And it says here their current president is Armand E. Sabitoni. I'm not sure how to pronounce that person's name. They have affiliations with AFL-CIO and NABTU. So let's go ahead and dive into more details of this one. It says the Laborers International Union of North America, often shortened to just the Laborers Union, is an American and Canadian labor union formed in 1903. Number one, that concerns me if it was founded both in America and Canada at the same time. So I would want to research that because Canada is completely different than the United States and they don't view labor the same way that we do. We have a different market than them because we have a truly free market, whereas they do not. They have many things that are socialized medicine, or their government is not very good with some of their private sector employers up there. So I would be very concerned about that unless the wording is just funky with this. Goes on to say, as of 2017, they had about 500,000 members, about 80,000 of whom are in Canada. The current general president is Terrence M. O'Sullivan, who was appointed general president in 2000, elected by delegates in 2001, and re-elected in 2006. There are 9 regions across North America. These regions are further divided into 500 local unions. One region is in Toronto, Canada, and is led by Joseph, can't pronounce his last name, Mancinelli, I believe, Local 183, which is the largest construction local union in North America. One thing that just came to mind with this, I think we need to be careful who we merge with within the continent of North America, because just because we're called North America, that doesn't mean that our countries are the same, that our laws are the same, and that we want to practice things the same way. And I'll give an example. One of the biggest examples I have is socialized medicine. There were several stories, probably the late 2000s, I think, where there were young women up in Canada that they were supposed to get their annual pap smears, but because they have socialized medicine, they were discouraged from getting pap smears. Well, several of these young women, and I mean like early 20s, late teens, early 20s, several of them developed cervical cancer when it could have been easily prevented and it could have been easily caught early. And I don't know if any of them have passed away per se, but several of them had to undergo chemotherapy and they lost their hair. Some of them were metastatic cancer. And that's one of the problems with, we don't want to mirror another country that behaves like that because they're not even taking care of their young people. And plus, they did not even want to use just a regular screening tool just for public health. Like it's a basic screening tool that doesn't cost a lot of money and it can catch disease early. So the stupidity in what Canada was doing and is doing is that they're trying to cut back cost on medical care. But what ends up happening is the cost of medical care skyrockets when you don't catch diseases early because the cost of care is more expensive because then you're having to do more to try and save that person's life. Well, in socialized medicine, it's more or less, they don't really care whether you live or die because they're looking at the bottom line, which is money. But even then, they're not even managing money correctly because if you actually are managing money correctly, then you're going to try to avoid disease, not let it just run rampant at any stage in someone's life. You're going to try and invent and encourage people to get yearly exams, maybe blood work, pap smears, prostate exams, all these things that are simple tests that they can do yearly, an annual exam, not every 5 or 6 years or 3 years, but every year. See, because I look at it this way. even airplanes get an annual exam. Like they have a yearly inspection. I mean, human beings are way more important than an airplane. But just look at it from the point of view that this government in Canada, they care more about cars and airplanes than they do about their citizens. That's pathetic and sick. Because they have laws and regulations that require different inspections within different industries, but then when it comes to human life, especially when it comes to the life of women and their health, they don't care about them. They see them as a burden, and they think, oh, well, let's look at the statistics and see, well, if you got a pap smear only every 3 to 5 years, there wouldn't be that many that get cancer. That's a bold-faced lie. And secondly, someone got cancer. In fact, several people get cancer. Thousands of people get cancer when you don't detect stuff early. So if anything, we need to be careful not to have this globalist mentality where we want to mirror other countries, especially countries that are close to us on the North American continent. Because see, here's the thing. There are so many people that sell their house, they sell their property, they sell everything in Canada and come over to the United States like in Michigan or Wisconsin or those states that are further up north for medical care, because they're not getting the proper medical care that they need and that they were paying for with their tax dollars back in Canada. So they sold everything to come over to the United States to where it's privatized medicine, where you get what you pay for most of the time. And I say most of the time because sometimes, side note, with some health insurance companies, they try and pigeonhole you so that you don't have access to what you need. But that doesn't mean you socialize medicine and just have the government be in charge of it, because look at it this way. The government can't hardly run the DMV or the post office. So why would you trust them with your health and your prescriptions? I mean, that's how you need to look at this, because that is actually what is going on and what has been going on for a long time in Canada and other countries that have socialized medicine. Socialized medicine is great if you never get sick, if you never have a problem, or if you don't like doctors and you never go see a doctor. But see, here's the thing. With socialized medicine, when you need health care, it's not there for you the same way that it is in the United States when it's privatized medicine. So just keep that in mind, that you need to be careful who you merge with. Just because you work in the same industry but you work in different countries, that doesn't mean you look at your industries the same and that they're regulated the same way or that you're paid the same wages. So just remember that. So then it goes on to talk about their history, and this is from 1900 to 1920. It says, this lovely abbreviation, the laborers' union origins stretch back to the 19th century when local construction unions began popping up across the United States. Then in March 1903, Samuel Gompers, the president of the American Federation of Labor, successfully persuaded various local construction unions from across the United States to unite in order to consolidate power in their fight against unfair labor practices. As a result, on April 13, 1903, the International Hood Carriers and Building Laborers Union was established at its founding convention in Washington, D.C. At the convention, there were 25 delegates from 23 unions in 17 different cities in attendance. During the course of the convention, the delegates elected a general president, Herman, I think it's Lillian, a general secretary treasurer, Harold Stember, and adopted a declaration of principles. Also, the delegates were able to produce the union's first charter, which claimed jurisdiction over wrecking of buildings, evacuations of buildings, digging of trenches, piers and foundations, holes, digging, lagging, sheeting of said foundations, holes and caisson work, concrete for buildings, weather foundations, floors or any other, whether done by hand or by any other process, tending to masons, mixing and handling all materials used by masons except stone setters, building of centers for fireproofing purposes, tending to carpenters, tending to and mixing of all materials for plastering, whether done by hand or any other process, clearing of debris from buildings, shoring, underpinning and raising of old buildings, drying of plastering, when done by salamander heat, I'm not sure what that term means, but I'm sure that's interesting, and handling of dimension stones. 9 years later, in 1912, the IHC and BLC experiences two name changes. First, in September, the union's name was changed to the International Hood Carriers and Common Laborers of America. Then, in December, the name was changed again to the International Hood Carriers Building and Common Laborers of America. During the early 20th century, the union achieved considerable wage raises for members in Pittsburgh, New York City, New York, and Chicago, and orchestrated strikes in Boston, St. Louis, and Philadelphia. By 1920, membership had climbed to 96,000 members. The union backed calls by African American workers to be allowed full and equal status as union members, denying permission for segregated unions to be founded in Kansas City and Cincinnati. The next section is from 1921 to 1940. It says in 1929, the union expanded to include the Tunnel and Subway Contractors International Union. Then 8 years later, the union expanded again to include the Pavers International Union. However, during the Great Depression of the 1930s, membership fell to under 30,000 as more and more people lost their jobs. In 1940, the union moved its international headquarters from Massachusetts to Washington, D.C. Also, in October of that year, union dues were suspended in support of the United States' pending involvement in World War II. Then it goes on to say, by 1942, despite the decline in union membership during the early years of the Great Depression, membership climbed back up to more than 400,000, over half of which left their jobs to serve in World War II. In September 1946, at the General Convention in Chicago, the union created a monthly journal called The Laborer. However, the first issue of The Laborer was not published until June 1947. A few months later, in September, the union signed its first national pipeline agreement, which protected wages, benefits, and safety conditions for pipeline workers. During the 1950s, the union made significant gains concerning health and welfare benefits. For example, in 1956, laborers in Pittsburgh were able to form pension plans. That's good. That's good to have that. Also, in 1955, the union helped establish the National Joint Heavy and Highway Construction Committee. The purpose of the committee was to ensure that union members could take advantage of the jobs created by the Interstate Highway Act of 1954. In 1962, the laborers met with President John F. Kennedy at the White House to pledge not to discriminate when hiring. Later, after President Kennedy was assassinated, the union went back to the White House yet again, this time to pledge support for President Lyndon B. Johnson's war on poverty. That's kind of disturbing on that because it's a social welfare program. Union members even participated in Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. In 1965, the union was renamed the Laborers International Union of North America. A year later, the union created the Laborers Political League, that's concerning, in order to both influence politics, which shouldn't do that, and encourage its members to participate in the political process. Now here's the thing, it's one thing to encourage your members to vote and to have a voice, but it's another thing to try and take over a political platform. That is never appropriate, and that is very concerning to see that. In 1968, the union expanded to include over 60,000 new workers from the National Association of Post Office Mail Handlers, Watchmen, Messengers, and Group Leaders. Also, the Journeymen Stonecutters Association of North America joined with the union as well. During the 1970s, the union continued to push for improved education and training for its workers, despite a slowdown in construction projects. For instance, in 1971, the union's Laborers Associated General Contractors Fund completed a film and held its first national training conference. In addition, the union helped hospital workers organize under the AFL-CIO's Public Employee Department in 1974. Also in that year, the union signed a national agreement with bricklayers and masonry contractors. In 1976, the union began training women to work in construction with funds from the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. Other notable achievements for the union during the 1970s were newly established pension plans, that's good, in central and southern states, legal services for members of Louisiana Local 229, and a vision center for members in Massachusetts. Now, one thing I do like about this is that they helped to establish pension plans in central and southern states. The southern states of the United States have been poor for a long time. The South never really quite recovered to its full economic boom after the Civil War. Because the Civil War, I know this goes back a long time, but the effects of that war lingered for a long, long time. And you see the effects of it with some of the case studies that came out in regards to the young men that enlisted in World War I and World War II, and that the young men from the southern states were not as educated and they had poorer health conditions than men that were born and raised up north. So even though the Civil War was long gone and over, the effects of it were pretty dramatic and drastic, because what you have to remember with the Civil War that happened in the United States, part of the military action of the North against the South was to confiscate properties down there in the South, slash and burn, or just burn their property up, take all their livestock, if not slaughter it, and also burn their houses down, set their fields on fire, which was cotton, corn, wheat, everything, mostly cotton in the South. But the South basically, after the Civil War, during the Civil War, I take that back, during the Civil War and after the Civil War, the South completely lost its economy, and it suffered horribly. So it took many years for them to recover. Many, many, many years, like several decades. And this affected several generations of people that were born in the South. So for them to create pension plans, especially for people that are living in the southern states, to me, is a huge benefit, even if it is within a union. It is really good to help those people because their economy, I haven't looked at their economy lately, but I don't know if the numbers are the same or better than what they were producing in terms of gross income for their region when compared to what they were doing back in pre-Civil War times. I just don't know. But, when you go to the South and you see those beautiful southern plantations, that tells you how much money they were making pre-Civil War times. Like these huge, beautiful mansions with these beautiful columns, and they owned all this land, had all these workers, like they were very wealthy in the South. So then you have the Civil War happen, the bottom falls out of their economy because they're being punished, for having slavery. And so, but the South had a very hard time picking itself back up and getting back to where it needed to be, because imagine losing everything really bad. Imagine like your house being set on fire, your fields being set on fire, you don't have a car anymore, you don't have a boat, you literally have nothing. You maybe have the clothes on your back and you don't even have access to food. So then you're literally starting with the dirt that you're walking on. That's how bad it was for the South. And so what you have to realize is that a lot of people in the South during that time, they had to try and get new occupations, if not try to recover the occupation that they temporarily lost during the war and right after the Civil War. So that's kind of a mental note, and I know that because I have family that's from the South, and my ancestors came over here from France. They escaped France many, many, many years ago. They escaped being murdered and persecuted and executed for religious reasons. So my ancestors were kicked out of France. They went to, I think, Quebec, if I'm not mistaken. They got kicked out of there for religious reasons. And so their only option was to go to what is now considered Louisiana, because we had France owned some land where Louisiana is and some other states, and it was when the United States purchased that land, it was the Louisiana Purchase, and it was called Louisiana because of King Louis of France. So my ancestors, they settled there, and we've had family there for many, many, many years. But, my ancestors fought in the Civil War, and I actually have ancestors from my mom's side that fought on the South, and then my dad's side fought on the North, because his ancestors came over here from Ireland, I believe, to escape a potato famine. And they settled up north, and I don't know how eventually his family got down to Texas and Oklahoma, but, when you think about current situations going on, which back in the 70s, for them to have pension plans established for the southern states, that was probably one of the greatest things that they could do for southern workers, especially in unions back then. Because I don't know what their economy was like back then, but they're probably trying to help their their people, their citizens, have a good life, especially long term, especially when they need to retire or when they want to retire, as opposed to retiring with nothing. So the southern states, let me put it this way, even to this day, they're not considered super wealthy. They're just not, unless you include Florida, which the only reason why Florida is wealthy is because you've got all these snowbirds that have purchased property in Florida, and these snowbirds live in like Delaware, New York, all those northern states, usually Democrats. They have housing up in the north, but then they buy their summer home in Florida, and you can always tell where the snowbirds live in Florida because you'll see during election day where all the blue segments will pop up on a map, like on CNN or Fox, and you can tell where all these Democrats live because their county or their area will pop up blue on the Florida map, and then you've got the rest of the state that's not a snowbird, that did not move from New York or Delaware or Maryland, and they're voting red, they're voting Republican. So if you exclude Florida from considering them to be part of the South per se, we're talking about the states that, predominantly fought in the Civil War and had cotton farms and plantations is what we're talking about with that. Because I'm not aware that Florida has a problem with poverty or still has lack of literacy programs. I'm just not familiar with that. So I guess I'll educate myself on that part. But that's just kind of a history to that. So then it goes on to say the 1980s were tough times for labor in general due to President Ronald Reagan's tough stance on unions. However, there were some successes for this union. In 1981, the union locals in New York sought to improve their benefits by offering drug and alcohol rehabilitation programs. Also in that same year, this union created the New England Laborers Training Academy. The purpose of this academy was to spread awareness of the dangers of asbestos and teach union members how to safely remove it. Then, just 6 years later, the union signed a national agreement with the Asbestos Abatement Contractors Association, ensuring safer working conditions for all its members. 2 years prior to that, the union won another significant victory when the Department of Labor formally recognized highway flaggers as members of the union. This was important because it gave the highway flaggers better protection for their wages. In 1988, the union established the Laborers' Health and Safety Fund of North America, which was a co-venture between labor and management to help improve health and safety for workers. 1 year later, the union locals in Baltimore and Washington, D.C. followed the examples set by New York unions and instituted drug and alcohol rehabilitation programs. These programs have since been expanded to unions across the rest of America. During the 1990s, the union experienced a number of new organizing initiatives to improve and expand the union. By 1994, the United States Department of Labor had recognized construction as an apprenticeable, meaning you could be an apprentice occupation, which allowed the union to establish its own apprenticeship program. In 1998, the union created its public employee department. As a result, the union added approximately 5,200 Riverside, California county workers, along members of the Canadian Licensed Practical Nurses Association. Now, what the Nurses Association has to do with this, I have no idea. My guess is that they want more numbers and more membership dues. Branches of this union were found to have been infiltrated by organized crime in the 1990s. I'm not surprised. In one particular case, the Buffalo, New York wing of the Italian Mafia controlled Local 210 of the union for decades. I'm not surprised by this at all. A protracted investigation into the union's operations over the course of a decade eventually drove the crime family out of the union by 2006. Good luck with that. Goes on to say, in 2001, members of the union participated in the cleanup at Ground Zero in New York following the September 11 terrorist attacks. In 2003, the same year, the Laborers' Union celebrated its 100th anniversary. It also spearheaded the creation of its first construction charter school. The Cranston Public Schools Construction and Career Academy is a high school that teaches students about the construction industry and how to get into it. At the 2011 convention, the union passed several resolutions to help invest in political activism through the organization's Political Action Committee. I completely disagree with that. That is wrong. They need to stay out of our politics. On June 1st, 2006, O'Sullivan announced that the union had disaffiliated from the AFL-CIO and joined the Change to Win Federation. However, union officials said on August 13, 2010 that the union would leave Change to Win and rejoin the AFL-CIO in October 2010. I would be interested to know why they're flipping back and forth. If I had to guess, it has to deal with management and power and money. That would be my guess, because that's usually what it is. In May 2016, in the midst of the 2016 United States presidential election, the union donated $1 million to Priorities USA Action, a super PAC which supports Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. According to the union's Department of Labor records since 2005, when membership classifications were first reported, the union's membership has been in a slow decline across all categories except retired members. That's concerning, because that means you've got more people taking benefits out than people paying in, which reports a slight increase during the period. The most drastic decline, by over half, has been in mail handlers associate members, which is the second largest category of members and the only category reported as ineligible to vote in the union. The union contracts also cover some non-members, known as agency fee payers, which since 2006 have numbered, comparatively less than 1% of the size of the union's membership. Agency fee payers have also fallen by about half of its reported number, although comparatively marginal throughout. As of 2013, this accounts for about 90,000 mail handler associates, which is about 16%, 68,000 retirees, which is about 12%, and 38,000 mail handler regulars, which is about 7%, plus less than 2,000 non-members paying agency fees, compared to about 362,000 regular members. So, I did want to go back to what they were saying about Ronald Reagan. Reagan was tough on unions, but for good reason. Let me get a drink of water here. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so here's the thing. Ronald Reagan was very tough on unions, but for a good reason, and here's why. Now, mind you, I was a little kid when some of this was happening because I was born in '84, but my parents remember several unions that went on strike and caused a lot of problems in the United States. And what I mean by that is that there are unions that are directly involved in American daily life, and there are some unions that are not directly involved in daily life. Like, for example, if you work in construction and you have a union that is in the construction industry, the only way that if they go on strike, if it affects you, is if, like, maybe they refuse to build your house or your office building. Unions that greatly impacted the United States and negatively impacted the United States was the air traffic controller strike. That was a big one. They went on strike because they refused to come to agreement on wages and pay and other things like that. And it grounded a lot of planes. Like, it brought air traffic control almost to a complete halt. And, President Reagan, he tried very hard to negotiate with these people, because he is for the people, but he is not for unions trying to dictate to the entire United States if someone can board a plane or not. So this union tried to stop airplane traffic, whether it was national or international. They went on strike, and they did it the wrong way. They were too aggressive, and they were not realistic, and they were not reasonable. So what President Reagan did, he said, okay, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, you have less than 24 hours to show up to your job and get back to work, or you're all fired. So he had to do that. And he can do that because he was the president of the United States at that time. And it's a good thing he did that, because they were affecting the entire industry in the entire United States. So basically, they were throwing a hissy fit over pay. And, there's a time to fight for your pay, and there's a time to still go to work, but still, go to the I don't know how to describe, go to the business table, and negotiate your pay. But there are certain jobs in the United States that you just can't throw up your hands and say, well, I'm not going to do any of it, because the United States is too reliant upon these workers. I think that was the problem, was that the United States had allowed this union to have so much power that they could stop an entire industry in the private sector, not the public sector, the private sector, because traveling and tourism and these jetliners, they don't belong to the government. They belong to the individual companies, like American Airlines, Delta, Southwest. I'm missing out on several other airlines that were around at that time, but what his point was, President Reagan, was he was not going to tolerate a very aggressive union not being realistic and trying to control everybody else's life. And he said, you have to get back to work. Like, that's what I was talking about in one of my previous podcasts when I was very disappointed that this one teachers union, I think it was like over 800,000 members, went on strike. They had like over 1,000 strikes and didn't show up to their job to teach kids. Like, that's a big problem because public education is basic education. It's not private school. It's not higher education. It's basic, right? So, you have to be careful how I word this. It's like so much I want to say, so few little words to properly put it into place. Basically, you have to be careful who you allow to be in power. And it doesn't matter if it's the President of the United States, people that are your senator, your representatives, your congressmen, but it also has to deal with these unions. Because sometimes these unions like to act like they're all that in a bag of chips, and they act like they have control over the entire industry where they do not. See, because here's the thing, the industry existed before the unions. See, you can't have a union if you don't have the industry. So let's say, for example, we didn't have construction in this country. Well, if you don't have construction, then you can't form a union. Like, you have to put the horse before the cart, not the other way around. And so what happened with some of these very powerful unions that were very unethical, they were trying to make it seem like they're more important than other citizens of the United States, and they're trying to make it seem like their job was more important than other people's jobs. And for example, with the air traffic controllers, if they had stayed on strike, these pilots were losing out on money. And they have their own unions. But the air traffic controller union, they didn't care about anybody else. They were very selfish and inconsiderate. All they cared about was themselves. Like, they did not take into consideration that other people are dependent upon them for their labor. And that is very important to remember, that, just because someone has a job and it's important to that one person, what you do within a company is important to other people. So it's not all about me, it's about we. There's a time and place to fight for yourself. There's a time and place to fight for your industry. And then there's a time and place to just do the right thing. Regardless of whether you like it or not, you have to do the right thing. So I know that there are some people that are not a fan of President Reagan, but he did a lot for our country. I don't know every little thing about him, but I do know that he was a tough guy, and he helped the United States through a lot of tough times, and he did not put up with communists. He did not put up with bad leaders. He helped get Americans that were being held hostage at different embassies overseas. He helped get them out immediately. Once he got into office, he told these not-so-kind countries and groups that were holding Americans hostage, you have less than 24 hours to release those people or we're going to kill you. And he meant it. And what's interesting is that these other countries over there, typically in the Middle East, they know that when a Republican gets into office, a Republican's not going to think twice to bomb him. A Democrat will do anything they can to not go after American citizens over in the Middle East. We've seen that with Jimmy Carter. We've seen that with Barack Obama. We've seen that with Hillary Clinton, and she wasn't even president. She really screwed up on the Benghazi thing. But it's just one of those things that countries around the planet know that Republicans mean business, and they know that we're going to get stuff done. Democrats, there are some good ones, but liberals and Democrats are typically known for not doing the right thing, especially on an international stage. And we've seen that multiple times with different presidents. I think the best Democratic president I can think of, well, there's a couple of them that I like that were Democrats. That was JFK. I think he was a very good president. And he died way too soon. I don't agree with ever killing anyone. but you never assassinate a leader. It's just horrible. There's no excuse for that. And also, I think FDR was a great president. There were some things I don't agree with what he did, but he really brought the United States together during World War II and really helped push our country forward and basically instilled that sense of courage, because our country really was scared, especially when we got bombed Pearl Harbor. And, it was important for, FDR to do those fireside chats, as he calls them. That is one way that a leader can bring the country together, regardless of what party we're in, but we're fighting for the same cause, because we should all value human life. I greatly appreciate that, and I admire that in FDR. And I just wish that JFK could have lived out his entire lifetime on this planet and could have, succeeded in his presidency instead of his life being cut short. But, it's one of those things that it's not always about what party you're in. It's about the individual actions that are going on and the agendas that you have within your party. Because I look at it this way. This is kind of a little off topic, but I don't think JFK would have been for some of these crazy unions we have now, because, JFK, he was considered, I would say, compared to our crazy liberal nutbag people we have in office these days, JFK was, I would say, a conservative Democrat back in his day. He would be considered a very conservative Democrat today, and he would not be for this liberalism. Because even John F. K., he understood the importance of the freedom of our country. He understood the free market. He understood capitalism. He had some ideas about social reform and social welfare programs, but I think he knew how to make those work. But unfortunately, his life got cut short. So then you have someone else taking over his ideas and trying to push them through. And I don't think they fully grasped what exactly he wanted to do to help our country. I really don't. But it's just one of those things that when tragedy happens, you still have to move forward and you have to do the best that you can. And, that's just kind of a side note on history there a little bit. But anyway, that is it for today's podcast. The next podcast, we will take a look at, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. This one should be interesting. It was founded in 1888. Like I said before, I love it when unions go back to before the turn of the century. I think that's really neat because you get to see more of their history, almost like a documentary. And so you get to see that they're standing the test of time, and it makes me wonder what about them is making it so that they are standing the test of time. And, and if anything, I just look forward to, and I really do look forward, I know I can get irritated about stuff, but I would rather see a union do good things than bad things if we're going to have unions, which we do have unions, and they are part of our society, and they are part of our history as a country. But, with all this in mind, I look forward to seeing a good union that doesn't get involved in politics, but focuses on its members in the communities and does not just collect membership dues and donate them to political parties and does not send those monies overseas. Because, I'm very skeptical about unions that partner with unions that are outside the United States, because it's really about money. Because other countries, they're jealous of the United States. I mean, let's just say it like it is. The United States is very wealthy. We are a world superpower. We are number one. And we're like that because we believe in God. In God we trust. We have a free market. We believe in capitalism. And we believe in equal rights. And we have a wonderful document called the Constitution of the United States. And, whenever countries try to mimic us, they do really well because they're trying to give people as much freedom as possible, but also honor the law. Where other countries fail is when they just want to try and have as much money as we have in our country, but they're not willing to give their citizens freedom. And typically those countries are very corrupt, and they often start killing their citizens. An example of that would be the USSR with Stalin. Different European countries, especially during World War II. There are others over there right now. Well, I would say China is a good example of this. We don't get very much news about China, but we know it's a communist country, and we know that if you speak up against the Chinese government and you're over there, they will quickly round you up, arrest you, probably torture you and execute you as soon as possible, and your family may or may not get your body to bury it. And that came out in a scandal several years ago. I read this article that there was this slightly mentally retarded guy from Europe, and he went missing. His family was wondering what happened to him, and he ended up in communist China somehow. They don't know how, and the communist government falsely accused him of being a spy, and he didn't really know what was going on. He was a gentle soul. His family was trying to find him, and the communist government, I don't know if they refused to give back his body or if they had already, They had already donated it to their science department and were experimenting on it. Like, they were very cruel to this man, and they were very cruel to this family. And so, I mean, that's just an example of how China treats human life. It doesn't treat it as human. It treats it as completely temporary, not worthwhile. And if you're not Chinese, they truly believe that you are below them. The communist China. They don't even treat their citizens like they're citizens. It really is distressing over there. And right now, the Christian faith has to be underground in communist China because you could be killed or arrested and or both if you try and promote any type of religion, but especially Christianity. So there are a lot of underground preachers and teachers and members that are Christians over there that they want the holy word of God and they want to be able to practice their faith freely, but they cannot because the government is so corrupt and because it's communist. So, I mean, there are countries that, they try and say that they believe in freedom and that their citizens are free and that their job market is great, but you have to look at it as a whole. And communist China is one of those countries that they try and say that, they're all pro-business and things like that. They may be pro-business in a way, but it's only to get their hands on the money. It's not to help their citizens have a better life and have a good lifestyle and to be safe and secure, because they don't want their citizens to really be in charge of anything. That's how the Communist Party works. So I bring that up because whenever you see scandals within these unions that go back to communism, you need to perk your ears up at that, because that is a red flag that something else is going on that is not the American way, it's not the right way, and it's not capitalism, it's not the free market. And if it's not the American way, if it's not going based off the U.S. Constitution, or if it's not with the freedom of religion, then you've got some serious problems there. And so just to be aware of those things and to always strive for the best, because if you truly value, your neighbor, because I look at it from a Christian point of view, love thy neighbor as thyself. Well, if you truly love somebody, then you're going to always want what's best for them. And communism and fascism never wants what's best for the other person. It's just take, and then kill, kill. We've seen that time and time again with these dictatorships and these fascist and communist governments. So whenever someone is infiltrating an organization, whether it's a union or a non-union organization, and they have communist ties or they have kind of that fascist regime mentality, that always concerns me, because I know that they do not believe in equal rights. And they do not believe in liberty and freedom for all. They believe in liberty and freedom for the few. And they don't think you're one of the few. They think they are one of the few and that they are above you. So just keep that in mind with that going forward, and with learning more and more about different unions. And also we tend to learn about other countries here, because some of these unions are doing business with other countries and their labor unions. And if it was me, I would not want my union doing that. If I was in a union, I would request that we disaffiliate with an international union, because I know that my monies would be going over there. And I don't want my money going overseas when it needs to stay in my community. Because I believe in helping out locally first, because that's where you're going to see the most results. Because I like to see results. Everybody does. And you will get immediate results if you help out locally first. So until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole, and that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.